She was 37 years old, standing in her fiancé's kitchen in heels, food plated, champagne already chilled, when she heard him tell his best friend exactly what he thought of her. He called her convenient. He said she was past her prime and knew it. He said she was easy because she had nowhere better to go. And then he laughed, and his friend laughed with him. Camille stood there with a serving spoon in her hand and made a decision. What Derek didn't know was that she hadn't just been loving him for 4 years. She had been watching him. And the woman he had just described to that friend, desperate, finished, easy, was about to show him exactly how wrong he was. Before we begin, remember this. While the story you're about to hear is fictional, the message behind it is very real. At Zara Tales, we believe the right story at the right moment can change a life. Let me tell you something about the dress. Camille had bought it 6 months before that night. Put it on layaway, actually, because it cost more than she would normally spend on herself. Navy blue, cut just right. Derek had seen her in it once and said it made her look almost model thin. She had filed that away the way you filed away a compliment when you were grateful for it instead of bothered by it. She should have been bothered by it. But that night, standing in his kitchen with the oven still warm and the champagne already in the fridge, she put that dress on like it was armor. That was who she was back then. A woman who turned compliments into reasons. Camille Davenport ran the administrative operations for a mid-sized hospital system with 460 employees under her umbrella. She managed multi-million-dollar budgets. She caught errors that would have cost people their jobs and fixed them quietly before anyone knew to panic. She was good at what she did. More than good. She was thorough, organized in the way that looked calm from the outside but was actually running calculations every second. She brought all of that home with her. Every bit of it. She had been with Derek Okafor, her fiancé, financial planner, the man she had built 4 years around, long enough to know his coffee order, his mother's birthday, and the exact way his jaw tightened when he felt professionally threatened. She knew which friends brought out his generosity and which ones made him perform. She knew his fears before he named them. That was what 4 years looked like when a woman was paying attention. He knew she took her coffee with oat milk on a good day. She had told herself that was enough. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary and the good wine she had chosen for the sauce. She had left a quarterly review meeting early to start the prep, gotten home 2 hours ahead of the guests, changed into the dress in the upstairs bathroom, and touched up her makeup without being asked. 3 of Derek's closest friends were supposed to come that evening. A small celebration dinner. Informal, she had said, but she had set the table properly, folded the napkins, and chilled 2 bottles because she wanted it to feel like something worth celebrating. They were engaged. 3 months in, wedding 8 months out. The joint account she had been filling steadily, every paycheck consistent as rent, sat at just over $14,000. She believed in them. That was the part that still cost her something to sit with. She had genuinely, fully believed. She had turned down a promotion in Atlanta the same week Derek proposed. Director of operations for a regional health system, the kind of role that came around once, maybe twice in a career like hers. She turned it down and told herself it was love. Looking back, she thought it was also fear. Fear of what 40 looked like when you were doing it alone. When you were the woman who chose the career and lost the man and had to explain that at every family dinner until somebody changed the subject. Her mother used to say, "Camille, you give too much too fast. Make them work for it." She could still hear it in her voice. Sunday mornings, the smell of eggs and gospel music bleeding softly through the walls of her small kitchen, her mother standing at the stove, not even looking, just talking like she knew something Camille didn't. Camille had thought she was old-fashioned. She had thought love was supposed to be generous. She wasn't sure what she thought anymore. Derek came home early. He was loose in the way that meant he had already had a drink somewhere, laughing at something on his phone before he even cleared the doorway. He kissed her on the cheek, said the food smelled good, and walked to the living room. He didn't ask about her day. She noticed. She always noticed. She just kept plating. His best friend Troy arrived 20 minutes later. Big laugh, louder than necessary. The kind of man who filled a room without adding anything to it. One of the other guests had cancelled, so it was the three of them, and Camille was in the kitchen finishing the last of the prep while they settled in with their drinks. The wall between the kitchen and the sitting room was thin. That was a design quirk she had always loved. You could hear the whole house from that kitchen. She used to think it made the place feel alive. Derek's laugh drifted through first. Then Troy's voice, lower. You seem like you've got one foot out, man. You sure about all this? A pause. Then Derek answered. He called her convenient. He said she was past her prime and she knew it. That was why she was easy. He made a joke about the dress, about what was underneath it, about the difference between how she looked at dinner and how she looked in the morning. Troy laughed. Not nervously. Fully. Camille's jaw locked. She set the serving spoon down on the counter. She straightened her dress. She picked up the platter. She walked out there with a smile on her face. She set the food on that table. And when Derek raised his glass and said, "To us, to our future," she raised hers too and smiled at him like she didn't know a single thing. Troy left around 10. Big goodbye, too much laughing, a hand clap on Derek's shoulder at the door. Camille stood behind Derek and smiled and said it was good to see him. Troy looked at her once, just once, and something moved across his face that she couldn't name then. She could name it now. It was guilt. The cheap kind. The kind that showed up too late to be useful. Derek rinsed his glass, set it in the sink, and stretched his arms over his head like a man with nothing on his conscience. "I'm beat," he said. "You coming up soon?" "In a bit," she told him. "Let me get the kitchen." He kissed her temple and disappeared down the hall. She stood at the sink and turned on the water. She washed every dish, wiped every counter, put the leftover food away in containers and stacked them in the fridge the way Derek liked, labeled, organized, neat. She did all of it with her hands and none of it with her mind, because her mind was somewhere else entirely, running the same 60 seconds on a loop. Not hysterically. Precisely. The way she reviewed a budget discrepancy. Once for the shock, once for the facts. Convenient. Past her prime and knows it. That's why she's easy. The facts didn't get softer the second time through. They just got clearer. From down the hall, Derek called out. "Night, Camille." "I'll be in shortly," she said. Her voice was steady. That surprised her. And then it didn't. She waited until she heard his breathing change. That slow, even rhythm that meant he was under. She knew that sound the way you knew the sounds of a house you had lived in long enough. The settling of the pipes, the particular quiet after midnight. She knew exactly how long it took him to go from restless to gone. 12 minutes, usually. She gave him 15. Then she picked up her purse, walked through the kitchen, and slipped out the side door to the driveway. The night was cool and very still. She sat in the driver's seat without starting the car and looked at the house from the outside. The lit window upstairs, the curtain that moved slightly even though the window was closed. She used to love this house. That was a fact too. She called Phyllis Beaumont. Her oldest friend. A retired paralegal who had spent 30 years watching people sign documents they didn't understand and marry people they hadn't investigated. Phyllis answered on the second ring. "It's late," she said. "I know." She waited. That was the thing about Phyllis. She never pushed. She just opened the door and let you walk through at your own pace. Camille told her everything. Start to finish. No editorializing, no crying. Just the words she had heard through that thin wall and what she had done with them afterward. She told her about the toast. She told her about the smile she had held for 2.5 hours. Phyllis didn't interrupt once. When Camille finished, there was a short silence. Then Phyllis asked 2 questions. Is your name on the deed to that house? Camille's hands went still on the steering wheel. He said they would do it after the wedding. Phyllis's voice gave nothing away. And the joint account? Do you have full access to the statements? Online, paper, all of it? Camille thought she did. She thought she had the login. But sitting there in the dark, she realized she hadn't actually checked those statements in months. Derek managed the account. He was the financial planner. She had trusted the architecture because she trusted the architect. I'm going to find out, she said. Before you do anything else, Phyllis told her. Find out. There was a specific kind of hurt that lived in the chest like a stone. And then there was what happened when that stone got cold. Cold was different. Cold was useful. What Camille felt sitting in that car was not grief anymore. It was the particular clarity that came when you stopped hoping you were wrong. She went back inside. She moved through the dark house without turning on any lights. She climbed into bed beside Derek, pulled the sheet up, and lay there on her back, looking at the ceiling while he slept like a man who had never considered he might have anything to answer for. He thinks I'm too far gone to leave, she thought. Let him keep thinking that. She was still awake when the sky started to pale at the edges. The next morning, Derek was out of the house by 7:15. He had a breakfast meeting. Camille heard the front door close and lay there another full minute before she got up. She came downstairs in her robe, put the kettle on, and there it was. His laptop open on the kitchen counter where he had been reviewing something before he left, screen still lit. She wasn't looking for anything. She wanted to be clear about that. But the calendar was open, and right there in the middle of the week's view, clean as a line item in a spreadsheet, she saw it. A recurring Thursday lunch. 3 months of consecutive entries, every week blocked off at noon. One name, just one name. Brienne. She took a photograph without touching the keyboard. That was important to her. She leaned in close enough to read the screen clearly, held up her phone, and captured the image. 3 months of Thursdays, noon every week, the name sitting there like it had every right to be there. Then she straightened up, walked to the kettle, poured her tea, and left for work. Nobody tells you what the moment your life starts to crack actually feels like. You still have to show up for all of it. Every meeting, every signature, every polite conversation in the hallway about nothing. Camille ran 3 departmental check-ins that day. She approved 2 staffing requests and sent back a budget revision with notes. She handled a vendor dispute that had been sitting on her desk for a week and resolved it in 20 minutes because she simply didn't have the patience for anything that could be solved with information. Her hands moved. Her voice worked. The part of her that knew how to manage a hospital floor in a crisis managed this one the same way. Keep the surface steady while you figure out what is actually broken underneath. That evening, she sat down at her own laptop. Not his. Hers. She logged into the joint account. Her hands went still. The balance was wrong. Not off by a little. Wrong by a number that had a comma in it. She pulled up the transaction history going back 4 months. The transfers were there, neat and regular as rent payments. Different amounts but consistent timing. Always within the first week of the month, always to the same destination. An account she didn't recognize, listed under a business name that meant nothing to her. No company she had ever heard of. Nothing that matched any expense they had agreed on together. She read through it twice. Then she took screenshots. Every transaction, every date, every receiving account number visible on the screen. She emailed them to herself with a subject line that said only documentation, joint account. Then she pulled up her files. She had a copy of the lease for her old apartment, the one she had given up 18 months ago when she moved into Derek's house because that was the practical thing to do, because they were building something together, because the plan was to add her name to the deed before the wedding. The deed itself she had never personally held. Derek had said he was handling it with the attorney who drew up his estate planning documents. She searched every folder she had, digital and paper both. Her name did not appear on anything connected to that house. Not the deed, not the mortgage, not a single document that would tell a court or a bank or anyone with authority that she had ever lived there at all. 18 months of her life, her rent money rolled into his household account, her furniture in his rooms, and on paper she was a guest. She sat with that for exactly 1 minute. Then she called Phyllis. She read her the account figures straight from the screenshots. The opening balance. What it should have been after her contributions. What it actually showed. She read her the business account name the money had been going to. She kept her voice level because the numbers didn't need any help making the point. Phyllis was quiet for a moment. That money didn't disappear, Camille. It went somewhere specific. We need to find out where. I know. Good. Don't move anything. Don't say anything. Just document. Already started. Phyllis made a small sound. Not quite approval, but close. The sound of someone watching you find your footing and deciding not to interfere. Camille didn't confront Derek at dinner. He came home talking about his promotion review, how his manager had mentioned him specifically in a partner track conversation, how the next 3 weeks were critical for visibility at the firm. She asked polite questions. She refilled his water glass. She thought about her mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings, the smell of eggs and the gospel station kept at low volume. She used to say you could tell everything about a man by what he thought you didn't notice. Camille was 40 years behind on that lesson. But she was catching up fast. After Derek went upstairs, she opened a fresh notebook, the kind she used for budget planning, narrow-ruled, nothing special, and started writing every deposit she had ever made into the joint account. Every date, every amount. Transfer confirmations where she had them, bank statements where she didn't. She pulled up her personal account history and worked backward from the beginning, matching figures against memory, building the kind of record that didn't leave room for argument. It took 2 hours. When she was done, she had 11 pages of documented contributions in her own handwriting, cross-referenced with account records she had already emailed to herself. She capped the pen. She looked at what she had built. Then she thought about that business account name, the one she didn't recognize, the one Phyllis had said went somewhere specific. And she started to wonder exactly what kind of somewhere they were going to find at the other end of it. Thursday came the way all difficult things came. Ordinary, unremarkable, no weather worth mentioning. Camille had put in for a half-day of personal time the week before. She told her assistant she had an appointment. That was technically true. She parked across from the restaurant at 11:45 with a travel mug and a sandwich in a paper bag. It was a midtown spot Derek had mentioned twice. Once as a client lunch location, once in passing when he described a colleague's birthday gathering. He had mentioned it the way someone mentioned a gas station. Useful, unremarkable, nothing she needed to file away. She had filed it anyway. She always did. Patience was not a passive thing. Sitting in that car, watching the restaurant entrance, Camille was working. Her mind was running inventory. What she knew, what she could prove, what she still needed. The sandwich was just something to do with her hands. At 12:03, Derek's car pulled into the lot across the street. She watched him walk to the entrance. He was in his good charcoal jacket, the one he wore for client meetings, the one she had dropped at the dry cleaner last week and picked up 2 days later. At 12:05, a woman came around the corner. She was younger. That was clear from a distance. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned to brace for things. And she smiled when she saw Derek. The kind of smile you couldn't perform, only feel. He turned when he heard her. He touched the small of her back as they went inside. That gesture. Camille knew that gesture down to the pressure of it. Her jaw locked. She ate her sandwich. They were inside for 43 minutes. They came out close together, unhurried, the way you walked when the conversation hadn't finished and you weren't in any rush to let it. She said something and he laughed. Not the laugh he used in meetings. The other one. Camille took one photograph. Clear, well lit, both of them in frame. Then she put her phone in her bag, started the car, and drove back to work. She didn't let herself sit in the feeling. Not yet. Feelings were going to cost her focus, and focus was the only currency that mattered right now. She completed the rest of her afternoon. She approved a staffing reassignment, responded to 17 emails, sat in a budget meeting for an hour and 20 minutes, and contributed 3 comments that were actually useful. Nobody in that building had any idea that the woman at the head of that table had spent her lunch hour watching her fiancé walk into a restaurant with someone who was not her. That evening, she went to the firm's public staff directory. It took less than 10 minutes to confirm what she already knew from the photograph. Brienne. 29 years old. Client Relations Manager. Not a junior analyst, the way Derek had described her the 2 or 3 times her name had come up in conversation. Client Relations Manager was a different title entirely. It meant she worked with the same clients Derek managed. It meant they had reasons to meet that sounded completely reasonable on the surface. Her professional profile showed 3 months of listed activity. The dates aligned exactly with 3 months of Thursday calendar entries. Exactly. She emailed the profile page, the directory listing, and the photograph to herself. Clear subject line. Documentation, Brienne. Then she called Phyllis. She told her what she had seen. No extra words. Just the facts in the order they happened. Phyllis was quiet through the whole of it. And when Camille finished, she said, "Now we know the what." Yes. We still need the money. She was right. The what was hurtful. The money was actionable. And the business account receiving those transfers was still the piece neither of them could read yet. That account is the key, Phyllis said. Once we know who owns it, you'll know everything. Camille turned off the kitchen light, carried nothing upstairs but herself, and was in bed before Derek came home. She heard his key in the door, heard him move through the house, kitchen, bathroom, the particular creak of the 3rd step on the stairs. She kept her breathing slow and even. He came into the room, stood for a moment in the doorway the way he did when he thought she was sleeping, then changed clothes in the dark and got into bed. He didn't touch her. He was asleep in minutes. She lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, thinking about a business account registered under a name she didn't recognize, and all the reasons a man might open one without mentioning it to the woman he had promised his future to. The following Tuesday, Camille stepped outside during her lunch break and sat on the bench near the hospital's east entrance, the one nobody used because it faced the loading dock. Private enough. She called Phyllis. Phyllis had been looking for 5 days. "I found it," she said. No preamble. That was Phyllis. Camille uncapped her water bottle and waited. The account receiving those transfers belongs to an LLC registered about 5 months ago. Small, no website, no public business activity. Nothing that looks like it has ever actually done any business. She paused. "You want to know the registered agent?" Camille already knew. Something in her chest had already arranged itself around the answer before Phyllis said it. Brienne. Her name. Her signature. Filed with the state. Camille set her water bottle down on the bench beside her. 5 months ago. She thought about that number. Derek had proposed 11 months ago. Champagne and a restaurant and a speech about building something real. 5 months after that proposal, he had opened a business account with the woman he had been calling a junior analyst. She pulled out the small notebook she had been keeping since the night in the car. She wrote the LLC name, the registration date, Brienne's name next to the words registered agent, and the date Phyllis had found it. Then she drew a single line between the registration date and the date Derek proposed to her. 61 days apart. He proposed to her, and then within the same 2 months, he registered a business account with another woman and began moving their wedding money into it. That told her everything she needed to know about a man. He had never been in this with both hands. He was always hedging. Always calculating what each piece was worth and where it needed to go. She thought about the Atlanta promotion. The salary she had not taken. Every deposit she had made into that joint account, steady, dutiful, the way she did everything, while Derek directed pieces of it somewhere she was never meant to find. Her mother used to hum while she ironed on Sunday evenings, pressing every crease perfect. "You do the thing right," she used to say, "because doing it right is what you are." Camille had been doing everything right. She had just been doing it for the wrong man. She wrote the date one more time and underlined it. Then she called Phyllis back into focus and they went through the next steps together. Phyllis explained what the documentation could support. The transfers, the LLC, Brienne's name on the account. She used words like unauthorized disbursement and small claims threshold. Camille wrote those down too. She wasn't ready to pull any trigger yet. But she needed to understand every option she had before she decided which one to use. 3 days later, over dinner, Derek pushed his plate slightly to the side the way he did when something was on his mind that he considered worth announcing. "My promotion review is in 3 weeks, he said. Senior partner. That's the one." He leaned back in his chair, comfortable, certain. "It's a real opportunity. Different compensation structure, different client profile. Puts me in a completely different category." He said the word category like it tasted good. "Leadership has been watching the last quarter closely. My numbers are where they need to be." "What does the review involve?" she asked. "Formal evaluation, a presentation, and a character endorsement from the oversight committee." He said it cleanly, the way he said most things, like the outcome was already settled and the conversation was just courtesy. "You know, Peterson mentioned the engagement at the Meridian dinner last month. Said it demonstrated the kind of judgment the firm values at the senior level." He smiled at her. "So you see, you're already contributing to my career." That sentence. She let it sit right where he put it. "What happens if the review doesn't go well?" she asked. Derek laughed. The short, dismissive kind. "It won't." She nodded. She picked up both their plates and carried them to the sink. She stood at the counter with her back to him, the water running, and something clicked into place. Quiet and exact. The way a deadbolt sounded when you turned the key all the way. He had used their engagement to build credibility with his firm. His promotion depended in part on how he looked. And how he looked depended on her standing beside him, steady and unsuspecting, exactly where he had put her. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. He had given her the room. He just didn't know she was planning to use it. The following Saturday morning, she drove to her Aunt Renee's house. She told Derek she needed to run errands. He was still in bed, half awake, phone already in hand. He said without looking up. She stopped at the bakery on Clement Street and picked up 2 almond croissants and a small box of lemon tea cakes. Renee's favorite since before Camille was born. Then she drove the 20 minutes to her house in the quiet part of the neighborhood where the trees were old and the yard still had flower beds people actually tended. Renee, her mother's older sister, 64 years old, the person in her family most likely to know a true thing and say it without any extras attached, met her at the door in her house slippers and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at the pastry box. She looked at Camille's face. She stepped aside and let her in without a word. They sat at the kitchen table while the kettle heated. Camille set the pastries out on the small ceramic plate Renee always used. She arranged her tea things, methodical, unhurried. Camille didn't go straight to it. She asked her what she genuinely thought of Derek the first time they met. Renee was quiet for a long moment. She poured the water. She set the kettle down. She brought both cups to the table and sat across from Camille, and then she looked at her the way she used to look at her when she was 12 and knew Camille already had the answer to whatever she was asking. "I thought he was very good at making people feel seen," she said. "And I thought that was the thing to watch." Camille's hands wrapped around the mug. "There's something I didn't tell you," Renee said. "When you announced the engagement, I almost did. I've been carrying it since." She didn't rush her. "About 6 months before that man proposed to you," Renee said, "he came to me privately. Said he cared about you and wanted to make sure he could provide the kind of future you deserved." She said it with no drama, just the plain shape of it. "He asked me about the family finances. Specifically whether there was anything left from your mother's estate that you might still be in line to receive." Camille's jaw locked. "He was smooth about it," Renee continued. "Framed it like concern. Like a man who wanted to know what he was stepping into so he could take good care of you." She turned her mug slowly in both hands. "But I've been around long enough to know the difference between a man asking about a woman and a man asking about a woman's money. I shut it down. Told him the estate was settled and modest and not a topic I'd be discussing." She paused. "And then I said nothing to you because I didn't want to be the one who broke your heart on a feeling." She got up then and went to the small cabinet beside the refrigerator, the one with the good dishes and the envelopes of photographs she had never gotten around to digitizing. She came back with a photograph and set it on the table between them. Camille's mother, younger than she ever really knew her, maybe mid-40s, standing in someone's summer garden, laughing at something just outside the frame. Her head was tipped back. The light was hitting her just right. "She always said a man shows you who he is the moment you stop impressing him," Renee said quietly. "Derek stopped being impressed before he ever really started." Camille looked at her mother's face for a long moment. She would have known in a week, she thought. She would have known in a week. "I'm sorry I waited," Renee said. "You told me now," Camille replied. That was all she needed to say. She drove home with all of it assembled in her mind. Clear, complete, and cold as standing water. Derek had proposed because he believed there was an inheritance worth attaching himself to. When he discovered there wasn't, he didn't leave. Leaving would have cost him. Instead, he kept her in place. Stable, presentable, financially contributing, and too in love to look closely. And he opened a door to Brienne. Desire in one hand, security in the other, and Camille Davenport holding everything up from underneath. She wasn't the woman he chose. She was the structure he used while he chose someone else. When a woman finally sees the whole picture, she doesn't fall apart. She gets very, very quiet. And then she gets to work. That evening, she found Derek in the living room with the television on and a glass of bourbon on the end table. She sat down beside him. She told him she had been thinking they had never done a proper celebration with the people who actually mattered. His firm colleagues, a few family members, his closest friends. Something that showed everyone how serious they were about their future together. Derek looked at her. He smiled. Warm, easy, already pleased with himself for having a woman who thought of these things. "That's a wonderful idea," he said. She smiled back. She told him she would handle everything. The 2 weeks before that dinner were the most productive 2 weeks of her life. She booked Derek's favorite restaurant, an upscale southern fusion place downtown that he had taken clients to twice and always mentioned like it said something about his taste. She requested the private dining room. She sent handwritten invitations on good card stock, the kind you had to press a pen into. She confirmed attendance from Derek's 2 firm colleagues, including the one who oversaw his promotion review, a measured man named Gerald whom Derek had mentioned with barely concealed anxiety for 6 straight months. She confirmed Troy. She confirmed Phyllis. She confirmed Aunt Renee. She told Derek the guest list and watched his face arrange itself into exactly the expression she expected. Satisfied, flattered, a little proud. He said it was perfect. It was. 10 days before the dinner, she met Phyllis at a coffee shop midway between their neighborhoods. Phyllis arrived before her. There was already a folder on the table. They spread everything out between their coffee cups. The timestamp screenshots of the joint account transfers. The LLC registration documents Phyllis's contact had pulled. The professional profile confirming Brienne's title, her tenure at the firm, the registration date that landed inside the same 60-day window as Derek's proposal. It was all there. Dated, clean, documented the way Camille knew how to document things, because this was what she did. She managed systems. She tracked irregularities. She built cases before she ever called them cases. Phyllis had drafted the demand letter. She slid it across the table and let Camille read it in full. $6,800. That was the total of the unauthorized transfers. Money from a joint account they had opened together for their wedding, moved without her knowledge into an LLC registered to the woman he was sleeping with while she was refilling his water glass and smiling across the dinner table. $6,800 plus 18 months of her life. But you couldn't put that in a demand letter. Small claims gives you a strong case, Phyllis said. You've got documentation, you've got the account agreement, and you've got transfer records that don't match any shared expense you can account for. But the letter alone, delivered correctly and at the right moment, might get you results faster. She tapped the folder. Men like Derek don't want court. They want the appearance of control. The minute a formal letter arrives, that appearance cracks. Camille held the letter for a moment. She thought about timing. The dinner. The promotion review. The specific order in which information would do the most damage if it was released precisely rather than just released. Hold it, she said. Don't send it yet. Phyllis looked at her over her coffee cup. She didn't ask why. She had known Camille long enough to know that when she asked her to wait, she wasn't hesitating. She was sequencing. One move left, Camille said. Phyllis nodded once and put the letter back in the folder. That same week, Derek mentioned the dinner to his colleagues at the firm. He told Camille about it at dinner one evening, pleased with himself in that easy, unbothered way he had when things were going according to his image of himself. He said Gerald had commented that it was nice to see a man whose personal life was as solid as his professional reputation. Derek relayed this like he was sharing good news. Camille passed him the bread. Her mother used to hum while she set the table on Sunday mornings. Old gospel melodies, soft and unself-conscious. The sound of a woman entirely at home in her own life. Camille had been thinking about that sometimes in Derek's kitchen. How she had been setting a table that was never going to be hers. You really put this whole thing together, Derek said one evening, gesturing vaguely at the dinner, at her, at all of it, like she was a feature of the room that was performing well. I did, she said. The night before the dinner, she turned off the bathroom light and got into bed. Derek was already there, scrolling his phone. He set it down after a few minutes. The room went quiet. Then he reached across the space between them and found her hand in the dark. He squeezed it. I'm a lucky man, he said. He meant it. That was the thing. He genuinely meant it, just not in any way that had anything to do with her as a person. He meant he was lucky to have someone steady, someone who planned and organized and deposited money and smiled at dinner tables. He meant he was lucky to have a structure that held. Camille turned off the lamp. She said nothing. And in the dark, for the first time since the night she had stood in his kitchen with the serving spoon in her hand and heard her life crack quietly in half, she smiled. Tomorrow she had a dinner to host. The restaurant manager met her at the door. She had called ahead that morning, not to change anything, just to confirm the room and ask one small favor. She wanted to be seated before the first guest arrived. He walked her to the private dining room himself, pulled out the chair at the head of the table, and she thanked him and sat down. She smoothed her dress, crossed her ankles, set her purse on the empty chair to her right. She had spent 20 minutes that afternoon deciding what to wear. Not for Derek. Not to impress his colleagues or signal anything to the room. She chose the dress because when she looked in the mirror, she looked exactly like who she was. A woman who knew precisely what she was walking into. Black, clean lines, her mother's small pearl earrings, the ones she wore to every occasion that required her to be taken seriously. She sat at the head of that table and was, for the first time in a long time, entirely comfortable in her own skin. Aunt Renee and Phyllis arrived together. She had arranged that, asked them both to come early and come as a unit. Renee kissed her cheek and sat to her left without a word. Phyllis squeezed her hand once, firm and brief, and took the chair beside her. Neither of them asked if she was ready. They already knew. Derek's two firm colleagues came in next. Gerald shook her hand and said what a lovely idea this was. She thanked him and meant none of it. Troy arrived 5 minutes later. He scanned the room as he came in, clocked Renee and Phyllis, and something shifted in his expression. Just a flicker, there and gone. He was smart enough to feel that something had been arranged, even if he couldn't name what. He sat where she had placed his card and ordered a drink immediately. Derek arrived last. Of course he did. He came through the door already performing. Shoulders back, that easy smile, moving around the room like a searchlight, shaking Gerald's hand with both of his, laughing at something before anyone had said anything funny. He kissed Camille's cheek and told her she looked beautiful and it cost him nothing, the way it always had. He took the seat she had left him, not at the head because she was already there. He didn't notice. He was already talking. The first half of that dinner was the most interesting performance Camille had ever watched. Derek was charming in the specific way that only read as charm if you didn't know what was underneath it. He told a story about a client win. He asked Gerald about his daughter's college choice and remembered the school correctly. He made Troy laugh twice. He was smooth and warm and entirely at ease. A man who had never once entertained the possibility that the room might not be his. The food came, the wine was poured, the conversation moved the way it moved at a table where everyone was comfortable and nobody had said anything real yet. Then Derek lifted his glass. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about the future, their future, the word are doing a lot of work in every sentence. He looked at Camille when he said steady. He looked at her when he said generous. He called her the kind of woman who made a man want to be better. Gerald nodded approvingly. Troy looked at his glass. Derek finished. The table waited for Camille to look moved. She stood up. No ceremony to it. She just rose from her chair, smoothed the front of her dress with one hand, and waited for the room to go quiet. It did. I've been doing some financial planning of my own, she said. Turns out I've discovered a few things Derek forgot to mention. She didn't look at him yet. She looked at the table. She named the joint account. She named the opening balance, the target balance, what it should have held. She named the transfer amounts, the specific figures, the dates, 4 months of them, and the business account they had moved into. She named the LLC. She named the date it was registered. The same 60-day window as their engagement. She looked at Gerald, then at his colleague. I'd be very careful, she said, about where your client's money goes. The room had stopped breathing. She turned to Troy. She said his name clearly, so there was no question she meant him. You already knew what kind of man he is, she said. She held his gaze just long enough. I was just the last one in the room to find out. Then she reached up and took off her engagement ring. She didn't press it into Derek's palm. She didn't throw it. She set it flat on the table in front of her plate. The way you set down a pen when you had finished signing something and the business was concluded. She picked up her purse. She looked at Derek. Really looked at him. Perhaps for the last time. And she said 5 words. Don't call me. We're done. She walked out. Behind her, the table was completely silent. The morning after, she woke up in Phyllis's guest room. She had arranged it 2 weeks before, the same morning she had booked the restaurant. She had packed what mattered on a Tuesday while Derek was at work. Documents, her grandmother's quilt, the pearl earrings she had worn the night before, clothes enough for a month. She left his house key on the kitchen counter and said nothing about it. By the time he walked into that restaurant looking like a man with a future, she was already gone from his house in every way that counted. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Derek. 2 texts from Troy. She set it face down on the nightstand and went back to sleep. The weeks that followed moved fast in some places and slow in others. The promotion news came first. 8 days after the dinner, Phyllis called on her lunch break to tell her what her contact at a downtown networking group had already heard. Derek's senior partner review had been tabled. The colleagues present that night had carried the story back to firm leadership the way these things always traveled. Quietly, efficiently, and with enough detail to matter. The official language, she was told, was a judgment issue noted in the current review cycle. Professional, bloodless, permanent. Derek's arrogance had cost him the one thing he had been building toward for 3 years. And the beautiful part was that nobody had to lie to make it happen. Camille had simply told the truth to the right people in the right room. That was all. Derek called 11 more times that week. She didn't answer once. Not because she was angry. She was past angry. She simply had nothing left to say to him that she hadn't already said in 5 words. Phyllis sent the demand letter on day 14. Certified mail, return receipt. She wrote it clean and exact. The account number, the transfer dates, every figure, the total. $6,800 in unauthorized withdrawals from a joint account Camille had co-funded and Derek had been quietly draining. The letter named the LLC. It named Brienne as the registered agent. It cited the relevant small claims statutes. It gave him 30 days. He transferred the full amount in 19. No response, no explanation. Just a wire confirmation that landed in her account on a Thursday afternoon while she was eating lunch at her desk. She looked at the number, set her fork down, and said a quiet thank you to the version of herself that had screenshotted every single transaction instead of crying over them. 3 weeks after the dinner, she called Brienne once. She kept it short and she kept it kind. Brienne hadn't done anything to her that Derek hadn't engineered. She told her what the LLC had been funded with. She told her the words Derek had used about her that night in his kitchen, the ones Troy had laughed at. She didn't editorialize. She didn't ask for anything. She said what was true and let her decide what to do with it. Brienne was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me." 2 weeks later, Phyllis heard through the same network that Brienne had ended it. Camille won't pretend she felt nothing when she heard that. But what she felt wasn't satisfaction. It was closer to relief. The kind you felt when a door finally closed all the way and the draft stopped coming through. Troy's text came on a Sunday evening. 4 words. "I'm sorry I laughed." She read it once. She put the phone down. She didn't respond. Some apologies arrived too late to do the person any good. Troy wasn't sorry that night in Derek's living room when the laughing was easy and free. He was sorry now because now there was a cost attached. She didn't need that kind of sorry. She was already somewhere else. 6 weeks after the dinner, on a bright Tuesday morning, Camille stood in the empty living room of a furnished short-term apartment on the 3rd floor of a building she had chosen herself, in a neighborhood she had researched for 2 weeks, in a city she was still deciding about. The key was in her hand. Her name on the lease. Her signature at the bottom. Her deposit paid from an account that had only ever had one name on it. Hers. She stood there in the quiet and let it settle. She thought about the serving spoon, the weight of it in her hand that night, how she had set it down so carefully, so deliberately, like she was already making the first move in a game he didn't know they were playing. She thought about her mother, the way she had worked and loved and never wasted either. She thought about the woman who had stood in that kitchen and decided to wait, and to know, and to choose her moment exactly right. She did all right, Camille thought. She did all right. 14 months later, Charlotte, North Carolina. She chose that city the way she should have chosen everything that came before it. By herself, for herself, with no one else's preference factored in. She researched the health system for 6 weeks before she reached out. She knew the budget structure, the administrative gaps, the tenure of the current leadership team. When they offered her the role she had once turned down, she negotiated. She did it calmly, with documentation, the way Phyllis had taught her to do everything that mattered. She walked out of that final call with a senior director title and the largest salary of her career. She said yes on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting in her car in a parking garage, and she didn't tell a single person until she had already signed. There was a specific kind of quiet that lived in a decision nobody had talked you into. It was the best quiet she had ever known. Her apartment was on the 4th floor. 3 windows in the living room. Her name on the lease, the way it should always have been. Above her bed hung a framed print she had found at a weekend market 3 weeks after moving in. Abstract, warm-toned, completely impractical as a decorating choice. She bought it because something in her chest shifted when she looked at it. That was reason enough. It was the first thing she had ever purchased purely because it made her happy. Sunday mornings, she woke up slow. Her kitchen smelled like her own coffee. Strong, the way she actually liked it. Not the medium roast Derek had preferred, which she had been buying for 3 years without once asking herself why. She had a good pan now, heavy-bottomed, the kind that held heat. She used it every single weekend. Eggs, mostly. Sometimes more. Whatever she felt like. Nobody's schedule but hers. She still thought about her mother in that kitchen sometimes. The smell of her Sunday mornings. Eggs and gospel music and the particular warmth of a house where someone loved you completely. She would have liked this apartment. She would have stood at those windows and nodded in that particular way she had. The nod that meant yes, this is right. Phyllis drove up once a month. They found a restaurant or a bar or sometimes just a hotel lobby and they ordered too much and they talked too loud. She looked at Camille sometimes across the table with a small, satisfied expression, like a woman checking something off a list she had started a long time ago. Aunt Renee called every Sunday, regular as the gospel station. The conversations were shorter now than they used to be. 15, 20 minutes, easy and warm. They talked about small things. Renee's garden, Camille's new colleagues, what she had made for dinner on Friday. Short, easy phone calls between 2 people who had been through something hard together meant everything was fine. They meant the crisis was over. They meant they were just living now. And living was enough to talk about. Camille went on 2 dates that year. Not because she felt ready. She wasn't sure ready was a real thing. Or maybe it was something you only recognized after the fact. She went because she could, because she wanted to see whether she still knew how to sit across from someone new and be curious instead of cautious. Neither one led anywhere. She was not disappointed. She was genuinely and completely fine with whatever came next. That was not a small thing. She had spent years mistaking anxiety for love because the feeling of waiting and worrying and wondering felt like caring. What she'd had with Derek hadn't felt safe. It had felt urgent. She had told herself urgency was passion. She knew the difference now. One Saturday, she closed out a storage unit she had been paying on for 14 months. The last physical thread connecting her to the life she had left. Most of the boxes had already been sorted, donated, and cleared in stages. What remained was small. 2 hours of work, maybe less. Near the bottom of the last box, wrapped in a double layer of dish towels, she found the serving spoon. She stood there in the concrete corridor of that storage facility and held it in both hands. She didn't think about Derek. She thought about the woman who had set it down so carefully, so quietly, in a kitchen that was never going to be hers. How she had straightened her dress. How she had carried that food out and smiled across the table like her whole world wasn't cracking open underneath her feet. She had known something, that woman. She had known the moment hadn't arrived yet, so she waited. Camille put the spoon in the last box and drove it to her apartment. She put it in the kitchen drawer. She turned on the gospel station her mother played every Sunday morning. She made her eggs in the good pan. She ate alone at her own table, in her own home, in a city she had chosen, on a morning that belonged entirely to her. It was enough. It was finally more than enough. This is a story about what happens when a woman stops performing patience and starts using it. When she takes everything she was told made her too much, her thoroughness, her planning, her attention, her steadiness, and she turns it into the very tools that set her free. Dignity is not given to us by the people who choose us. It was always ours. Some of us just needed the right moment to remember it. Thank you for watching this story on Zara Tales. If it moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one.